Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are finishing up Emerson's journal collection number 25. He is age 31 at this point. It is 1834, and we are in December of that year. And with that said, I'll go ahead and get started reading it. We begin in December 11th. When the sick man came out of doors, the stars seemed to shine through his eyes into his heart, and the blessed air that he inhaled seemed to lighten his frame from head to feet. A little above I referred to one of my characters. It might be added that if he made his form a straitjacket to others, he wore the same himself all his years, and so reanimated for his beholders the order of La Trappe. One who showed ever in his fireside discourse traits of that pertinency and judgment, softening ever and anon into elegancy, which make the distinction of the scholar, and which, under better discipline, might have ripened into a Salmasius or Hetericus. Sage and savage strove harder in him than in any of my acquaintance, each getting the mastery by turns and pretty sudden turns. Save us, he said in his prayer, from the extremity of cold and violent sudden changes. The society will meet after the Lyceum, as it is difficult to bring the people together in the evening, and no moon, etc. Mr. N.F. is dead, and I expect to hear the death of Mr. B. It is cruel to separate old people from their wives in this cold weather. Thus is one reminded of the children's prayer, who in confessing their sins say, "Yes, I did take the jump rope from Mary." Pleasantly said he at supper that his last cup was not potent in any way, neither in sugar nor cream nor such song. It was so equally and universally defective that he thought it easier to make another than to mend that. The counselor's fine simplicity and sweetness of character saved his speech the other evening from being distressful to the hearers. Charles is reminded by him of Edward. There are some points of resemblance. This for one, that neither was ever put out of countenance. Concord, December 14th. Yesterday I sealed and dispatched my letter to Carlisle. Today, riding to East Sudbury, I pleased myself with the beauties and terrors of the snow. The oak leaf hurrying over the banks is fit ornament. Nature in the woods is very companionable. There my reason and my understanding are sufficient company for each other. I have my glees as well as my glooms alone. Confirm my faith, and when I write the word, faith looks indignant. Pledge me the word of the highest that I shall have my dead and my absent again, and I could be content and cheerful alone for 1,000 years. I know no isle so stately as the roads through the pine woods in Maine. Cold is the snowdrift, topping itself with sand. How intense are our affinities, acids and alkalis. The moment we indulge our affections, the earth is metamorphosed. All its tragedies and ennuis vanish, all duties even. Nothing remains to fill eternity with but 2 or 3 persons. But then a person is a cause. What is Luther but Protestantism, or Columbus but Columbia? And were I assured of meeting Ellen tomorrow, would it be less than a world, a personal world? Death has no bitterness in the light of that thought. In Boston, Hedge read me good things out of Schleiermacher concerning the twofold divisions of study. 1. Physics, or that which is. 2. Ethics, or that which should be. Also his definition of sciences and art, the one all things brought into the mind, and the other the mind going into things. Then the ascetic, or the discipline of life produced by the opinions. Every man's system should appear in his ascetic. Scarce one man's does. December 17th. If it has so pleased God, it is very easy for you to surpass your fellows in genius, but surpass them in generosity of sentiment. See not their meanness, whilst your eyes are fixed on everlasting virtues, being royal, being divine in your sentiment. This shall be another morn risen on mid-noon. This shall be your own. Oh no, God forbid! not your own, but a vast accession of the divinity into your trembling clay. God has made nothing without a crack except reason. What can be better than this? And then there's a Latin quotation with no translation. And it says, Note in Vasari's Life of Michelangelo. Poets and painters ever walk abreast. December 18th. I am writing my lecture of Michelangelo, clothed with a coat which was made for me in Florence. I would I were clothed with the spirit of beauty which breathed life into Italian art. Solon said, Such as the speech, such is the life of the man. Loathsome lecture last evening on precocity, and the dissection of the brain, and the distortion of the body, and genius, etc. A grim compost of blood and mud. Blessed, thought I, were those who, lost in their pursuits, never knew that they had a body or a mind. December 19th. He who makes a good sentence or a good verse exercises a power very strictly analogous to his who makes a fine statue, a beautiful cornice, a staircase like that in Oxford, or a noble head in painting. One writes on air, if he speaks, but no, he writes on mind more durable than marble, and is like him who begets a son, that is, originates a begetter of nations. The maker of a sentence, like the other artist, launches out into the infinite and builds a road into chaos and old night, and is followed by those who hear him with something of wild creative delight. December 20th. I like well the doctrine that every great man, Napoleon himself, is an idealist, a poet with different degree of utterance. As the love of flowers contains the science of botany, so the innate love of novelty, enterprise like that which delighted me when a boy in Atkinson Street, with climbing by help of a small ladder and touching for the first time the shingles of the shed, yes, and make every boy a poet when a fine morning in spring seducing shows him the uplands and the neighboring towns on his way to school. This same desire of the untried leads the young farmer in Maine to load his little wagon and rattle down the long hills on his way to Illinois. A strictest correspondence ties all the arts, and it is as lawful and as becoming for the poet to seize upon felicitous expressions and lay them up for use as for Michelangelo to store his sketchbook with hands, arms, triglyphs, and capitals to enrich his future compositions. The wary artist in both kinds will tear down the scaffolding when the work is finished, and himself supply no clue to the curiosity that would know how he did the wonder. The chickadees are very busy and happy in Caesar's woods between the spots of snow. I met them yesterday. What is the green leaf under the snow resembling a potentilla? Spiritual religion is one that cannot be harmed by the vices of its defenders. Unitarianism and all the rest are judged by the standing or falling of their professors. I refuse that test to this. It is true, I see this to be true, though I see it condemns my life, and no man liveth by it. They, spiritual laws, are truth itself. They are the measure of truth, and can no more be affected by my falling away, or all men's denial, than the law of gravity is changed by my acting as if it were not. Yet is it dangerous. It is very far from a system of negatives. It lowly, earnestly sees and declares how its laws advance their reign for evermore into the infinitude on all sides of us. Jesus was a setter up more than a puller down. Socrates was also. Both were spiritualists. George Fox, William Penn were urgent doers, hard livers, but they were of wrath. I see the world and its maker from another side. It seems to me beauty. He seems to me love. Spiritual religion has no other evidence than its own intrinsic probability. It is probable because the mind is so constituted as that they, its laws, appear likely so to be. It simply describes the laws of moral nature as the naturalist does physical laws, and shows the surprising beauties and terrors of human life. It never scolds and never sneers. It is opposed to Calvinism in this respect, that all spiritual truths are self-evident, but the doctrines of Calvin are not, and are not pretended to be by their understanding defenders. Mystery. This is the only live religion. All others are dead or formal. This cannot be but in the new conviction of the mind. Others may. This produces instant and infinite abuses. It is a two-edged sword because it condemns forms, but supplies a better law only to the living. It leaves the dead to bury their dead. The popular religion is an excellent constable. The true religion is God himself to the believer, and maketh him a perfect lover of the whole world. But it is only a cloak of licentiousness to the rest. It would dismiss all bad preachers, and do great harm to society by taking off restraints. My reason is well enough convinced of its immortality. It knows itself immortal, but it cannot persuade its down-looking brother the understanding of the same. That fears for the cord that ties them, lest it break. Hence Miss Roch affirms undoubtedly, I shall live forever, and on the other hand does not much believe in her retaining personality. December 21st. Who says we are not chained? He lies. See how greedily you accept the verse of Homer or Shakespeare, the outline of Michelangelo, the strain of Handel, the word of Webster. How thoroughly you understand and make them your own, and are well assured, too, that they are only units from an infinite store of the same kinds. Well, now put out of your own hands and take one more unit thence. I say you are chained. Michelangelo was the Homer of painting, Titian the Moor, or better the Spencer. The difference is the same betwixt the stern designer and the beautiful colorist that followed him, as between the severe Aristotle and the ornate Cicero. Blessed is the day when the youth discovers that within and above are synonyms. And then there's a Latin quotation by Aristotle, which has no translation. We can all put our hands towards the desired truth, but few can bring their hands to meet around it. He alone is an artist whose hands can perfectly execute what his mind has perfectly conceived. And then there is a quotation from Michelangelo, untranslated. The domestic man loves no music so well as his kitchen clock, and the airs which the logs sing to him as they burn in the fireplace. The best means of mending a bad voice is to utter judicious remarks with it. The second best is to favor it by silence. Then follow a translation of Michelangelo's Sonnet 7. I know not if it is the light of its first maker impressed on the imagination which the soul perceives, or if from memory, or from the mind, any other beauty shines through into the heart, or if in the soul yet beams and glows the bright ray of its primitive state, leaving of itself I know not what burning, which is perhaps that which leads me to complain. That which I feel, and that which I see, and that which guides me, is not with me, nor know I well where to find it in me. And it seems to me that another shows it to me. This, lady, happened to me when I first saw you, that a bitter sweet, a yes and no, moved me. Certainly it must be your eyes. December 22nd. It is very easy in the world to live by the opinion of the world. It is very easy in solitude to be self-centered. But the finished man is he who in the midst of the crowd keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude. I knew a man of simple habits and earnest character, who never put out his hands nor opened his lips to court the public, and having survived several rotten reputations of younger men, honor came at last and sat down with him upon his private bench from which he had never stirred. I too can see the spark of Titan in that coarse clay. Then there is a short quotation which might be actually, I think it has a translation below. It says, these lines from Juvenal might be thus rendered: whose hearts the god of day fashioned with loving hand and from a nobler clay. Wherever is life, wherever is God, there the universe evolves itself as from a center to its boundless irradiation. Whosoever therefore apprehends the infinite, and every man can, brings all worth and significance into that spot of space where he stands, though it be a ditch, a potato field, a workbench, or, more properly, into that state of thought in which he is, whether it be the making a statue or designing a church like Michelangelo, or holding silent meetings like George Fox and Job Scott, or fighting battles like Leonidas, Washington, Lafayette, exploring the law of laws like Plotinus, or loving like Socrates, Petrarch, and Angelo, or prescribing the ethics of the scholar like Schiller. Therefore is it in the option of every generous spirit to denominate that place in which he now is, his Rome, his world. His sunshine shall be Susa, his shade Ecbatana, and let him rest assured, if he invite them, not one deity will stay away from his feast. And therefore also is it that every good sentence seems to imply all truth. Truly exists that, and then it says in Latin, quodam vinculum commune, between all the arts and knowledges of men. Vitruvius said that to understand architecture needed not only to draw well, but also to understand music. And Michelangelo said of architecture that he who did not understand something of the anatomy of the human body could know nothing of that subject. The philosophy of waiting needs sometimes to be unfolded. Thus he who is qualified to act upon the public, if he does not act on many, may yet act intensely on a few, if he does not act much upon any, but from insulated condition and unfit companions, seem quite withdrawn into himself. Still, if he know and feel his obligations, he may be, unknown and unconsciously, hiving knowledge and concentrating powers to act well hereafter, and a very remote hereafter. God is a rich proprietor, who, though he may find use for sprouts and saplings of a year's growth, finds his account also in leaving untouched the timber of 100 years, which hardens and seasons in the cold and in the sun. But a more lowly use, and yet with right feeling and all parts of duty are alike lowly, is pleasing, that of serving an indirect good to your friends by being much to them, a reserve by which their sallies of virtue are fortified, and they cordially cheered by the thoroughness of a mutual understanding. How has Edward served us most in these last years? By his figures and invoices, or through the helpful influence of his perfect moral health? How serves the Aunt Mary? How but by bearing most intelligible testimony, which is felt where it is not comprehended? In friendship, too, observe my song. There is both equal, broad, and long, but this thou must not think to find with eyes of body but of mind. Empedocles. Love, idle of himself, takes up his rest, and harbors only in a slothful breast. If I were more in love with life, and as afraid of dying as you seem to insinuate, I would go to a Jackson caucus or to the Julian Hall, and I doubt not the unmixed malignity, the withering selfishness, the impudent vulgarity, that mark those meetings, would speedily cure me of my appetite for longevity. In the hush of these woods I find no Jackson placards affixed to the trees. We Republicans do libel the monarchist. The monarchist of Europe for so many ages has really been pervaded by an idea. He intellectually and affectionately views the king as the state, and the monarch is pervaded by a correspondent idea, and the worst of them has yet demeaned himself more or less faithfully as a state. A crown then is by no means a stripe of velvet with jewels, nor is Louis XVI Mr. Louis Capet, as we choose to affirm. Certainly there is something that mightily tickles a human ear in being named a nation, as Elizabeth of England, Mary of Scotland, Anne of Austria. All pomps and ceremonies of courts do only flourish and idealize the simple facts in which the state began, as the order of architecture do in every ornament refer to some essential part of the building. The Pope performeth all ecclesiastical jurisdiction, as in consistory among his cardinals, which were originally but the parish priests of Rome. So to the wise eye in etiquette is a history. Mr. Coleridge has thrown many new truths into circulation. Mr. Southey never one. Yet falsehood, superstitions are the props, the scaffolding on which how much of society stands. Look at the relation betwixt the uneducated and educated classes. One's afraid, and the other daren't, as the boys say. Each supposes much in the other which is not in him, and so the peace and place is kept. Accurately, I suppose, the graduate underestimates the grocer, whilst the grocer far overestimates the graduate, and so the strong hand is kept in submission to what should be the wise head. The reason why Mr. Graduate's secret is kept, and never any accident discovers his bankruptcy and produces a permanent revolution, is that there is a real object in nature to which the grocer's reverence instinctively turns, vis-a-vis the intellectual man, and though the scholar's is not that object, he is its representative, and is, with more or less symptoms of distrust, honored for that he ought to be. It is a manifest interest which comes home to my bosom, in every man's bosom, that there should be on every tower watchers set to observe and report of every new ray of light, in what quarter soever of heaven it should appear, and the report should be eagerly and reverently received. There is no offense done, certainly, to the community in distinctly stating the claims of this office. It is not a coveted office, it is open to all men. All see their interest in it, yet very few feel any inclination to adopt it as their vocation. The blessed God has given each of his calling and his ruling love, has adapted the brain and the body of men to the work that is to be done in the world. Greenough has an invincible penchant for a carved marvel, and John Haskins to Fry Caoutchouc. A small number of men, meantime, have a contemplative turn, and voluntarily seek solitude and converse with themselves, a work which to most persons has a jail smell. This needs a peculiar constitution, a dormancy of some qualities, and a harmonious action in all that is rare. It has its own immunities, and also its own painful taxes, like the rest of human works. But where it is possessed, let it work free and honored in God's name. Every discovery he makes, every conclusion he announces, is tidings to each of us from our own home. His office is to cheer our labor, as with a song by highest hopes. Of the German nation, it is the only nation that addresses the deity with the appellation dear, lieber Gott. The sun is the sole inconsumable fire, and God is the sole inexhaustible giver. December 23rd. A good chapter might be writ of optical deceptions. A sort of disappointment is felt by an ingenious man on hearing opinions and truths congenial to his own announced with effect in conversation. They are so near to his own thought or expression that he thinks he ought to have spoken first. That is an optical deception of the mind. If they had not been uttered by this other, he would have not uttered them. It is merely under the fluence of this magnet that he becomes intensely magnetic. Take it away, and this effect will subside in him. Perhaps I shall never write of Shakespeare's sonnets, yet let any critic execute that work, and I should go to law with him for assault and battery. Bottom, in Shakespeare, is a philosopher of this kidney. He fathers each new part the moment it is named. It fills his whole horizon. He would be that alone. He mistakes his omnivolence for omnipotence. The only remedy is to present still a new thought to withdraw him from the last. It results from the fact that every thought is one side of nature, and really has the whole world under it. This exclusive prominence of one thought is that which Bacon indicated by Idols of the Cave. Time and patience change a mulberry leaf into satin. A good aunt is more to the young poet than a patron. Molière had happiness the year round from his old woman than from Louis. Do, dear, when you come to write lyceum lectures, remember that you are not to say what must be said in a lyceum, but what discoveries or stimulating thoughts have I to impart to 1,000 persons, not what they will expect to hear, but what is fit for me to say. No matter where you begin, read anything 5 hours a day, and you will soon be knowing, said Johnson. Out of these fragmentary, lopsided mortals shall the heaven unite Phidias, Demosthenes, Shakespeare, Newton, Napoleon, Bacon, and St. John in one person. December 24th. Him I call rich, that soul I call endowed, whether in man or woman, who by poverty or affliction or love has been driven home so far as to make acquaintance with the spiritual dominion of every human mind. Henceforward he is introduced into sublime society. Henceforward he can wave the hand of adieu to all things he coveted most. Henceforward he is above compassion. He may, it is true, seldom look at his treasure. He may, like one who has brought home his bride, go apart and compose himself and only take furtive glances at his good with a fearful joy, from the very assurance of confirmed bliss. But him I leave in this heaven, and all others I call miserably poor. A singular equality may be observed between the great men of the first and last ages. The astronomy, the arts, and the history of 60 centuries give Lafayette, Canning, Webster no advantage over Saladin, Scipio, or Agesilaus. The reason is, the arts, the sciences are in man, and the Spartan possessed and used the very talent in his war that Watt used for economical ends, and the pride and self-sufficiency of the ancient was founded on this very consciousness of infinitely versatile resources. The beggars of Sparta and of Rome hurled defiance with as proud a tone as if Lysander's fleet of tubs had been an armada, or the rude walls of Sparta had been the bastions of Gibraltar. The resources of the mechanic arts are merely costume. If Fabricius had been shown, instead of Pyrrhus's elephants, Napoleon's park of artillery, he would have displayed no more emotion. He would have found a counterbalance in himself. All the finites cannot outweigh one infinite. All the erudition of an university of doctors is not a match for the mother wit of one Aesop. Raphael's 3 manners of painting may be matched in the biography of every genius. Nature keeps much on her table, but more in her closet. A few words writ by a trembling hand of old Isaiah or Homer become an immovable palisado to guard their sense against change or loss through all the storms and revolutions of time. Where there is DEF, there must be ABC, saith Sancho's aunt. Here's an insertion by the editor. Here follows the passage in Friendship, the latter half beginning, Let me be alone till the end of the world, and then the 10 lines ending, Then be his echo. I lament with a contrition too deep for groaning every sacrifice of truth to fat good nature, and not less those where custom has insensibly produced a great alteration in a well-founded opinion. I am thankful that I was permitted to write blank in his bereavement, that I lack sympathy with the character of his wife. If I praise her virtues, he will now believe me. An obscure and slender thread of truth runs through all mythologies, and this might lead often to highest regions of philosophy. Isis and Osiris, Eros and Anteros. A singular correspondence is also to be remarked in the fables themselves. Old Nuremur is dead seems only a travesty of the great god Pan is dead and Pythian oracles. A few persons, 3 or 4 perhaps, are to Burns what nations and races and long chronicles of annals are to Gibbon, and often it may be suspected that Shakespeare taxed the name of Rome or France upon traits to which he had more truly given the name of Nicholas Bacon or John Sylvester. How beautiful are the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, that publisheth salvation. Forever graceful and unperverted eye are the acts of Jesus of Nazareth, the man who believed in moral nature and therefore spake, who came not in his own name. There is no object in nature which intense light will not make beautiful, and none which loses beauty by being nearer seen. It is a thin partition that divides the housebreaker and the hero, him that, in the conventicle, bawls glory, and the philosopher who muses in amazement. Only an inventor that knows how to borrow. Knowledge transfers the censorship from the State House to the reason of every citizen and compels every man to mount guard over himself and put shame and remorse for sergeants and maces. December 27th. We say every truth supposes or implies every other truth. Not less true is it that every great man does in all his nature point at and imply the existence and well-being of all the institutions and orders of a state. He is full of reverence. He is by inclination, though far remote in position, the defender of the grammar school, the almshouse, the Christian Sabbath, the priest, the judge, the legislator, and the executive arm. Throughout his being is he loyal. Such was Luther, Milton, Burke. Each might be called an aristocrat, though by position the champion of the people. Bacon never mentions Shakespeare, nor Spenser, though often very inferior Latin and Greek poets. Milton's praise of Shakespeare is most unequal to the subject, and Johnson's much more. Milton, in his turn, was not seen by his contemporaries, and was valued most as a scholar. Tasso, Dante, Michelangelo make no figure in Milton's estimate. Everything may be painted, everything sung, but to be poeticized, its feet must be just lifted from the ground. Snow and moonlight make all landscapes alike. I believe the Christian religion to be profoundly true, true to an extent that they who are styled its most orthodox defenders have never, or but in rarest glimpses, once or twice in a lifetime reached. I, who seek to be a realist, to deny and put off everything that I do not heartily accept, do yet catch myself continually in a practical unbelief of its deepest teachings. It teaches the eternal opposition of the world to the truth, and introduced the absolute authority of the spiritual law. Milton apprehended its nature when he said, "For who is there almost that measures wisdom by simplicity, strength by suffering, dignity by lowliness? That do I in my sane moments, and feel the ineffable peace, yea, and the influx of God that attend humility and love, and before the cock crows I deny him thrice." Quote, "There's nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so." A friend once told me that he never spent anything on himself without deserving the praise of disinterested benevolence. Saturday night. There is in every man a determination of character to a peculiar end, counteracted often by unfavorable fortune, but more apparent the more he is left at liberty. This is called his genius, or his nature, or his turn of mind. The object of education should be to remove all obstructions and let this natural force have free play and exhibit its peculiar product. It seems to be true that no man in this is deluded. This determination of his character is to something in his nature, something real. This object is called his idea. It is that which rules his most advised actions, those especially that are most his, and is most distinctly discerned by him in those days or moments when he derives sincerest satisfactions from his life. It can only be indicated by any action not defined by anything less than the aggregate of all his genuine actions, perhaps then only approximated. Hence the slowness of the ancients to judge of the life before death. Expect the end. It is most accurately denoted by the man's name, as when we say the Scipionism of Scipio, or "There spoke the soul of Caesar." The ancients seem to have expressed this spiritual superintendence by representing every human being as consigned to the charge of a genius or daemon, by whose counsels he was guided in what he did best, but whose counsels he might reject. Quote, "Heathen philosophers taught that whosoever would but use his ear to listen might hear the voice of his guiding genius ever before him, calling, and, as it were, pointing to that way which is his part to follow." Milton, Volume 1. December 28th. Whenever I open my eyes, I read that everything has expression, a mouth, a chin, a lock of hair, the lappet of a coat, a cream pot, a tree, a stone, the crimp or plate of a cap. So much I can see to the physiognomist and the craniologist. At the same time, I see well enough how different is the expression of a pink ribbon upon one and upon another head. But ah, the pink ribbons of clouds that I saw last eve in the sunset, modulated with tints of unspeakable softness, and the air meantime had so much vivacity and sweetness that it was a pain to come indoors. Charles saw the same flecks of cloud and likened them to gold fishes. Had they no expression? Is there no meaning in the live repose which that amphitheatre of a valley behind Ball's Hill reflects to my eye, and which Homer or Shakespeare could not reform for me in words? The leafless trees become spires of flames in the sunset, with blue east for their background, and the stars of the dead calyces of flowers, and every withered stem and stubble rimed with frost, with all their forms and hues contribute something to the mute in music. Rather let me be a pagan suckled in a creed outworn, than cowardly deny or conceal one particle of my debt to Greek art, or poetry, or virtue. Certainly I would my debt were more, but it is my fault, not theirs, if 'tis little. But how pitiful if a mind enriched and infused with the spirit of their severe yet human beauty, modulating their words they spake, the acts they did, the forms they sculptured, every gesture, every fold of the robe, especially animating the biography of their men with a wild wisdom and an elegance as wild and handsome as sunshine. The brave anecdotes of Agesilaus, Phocion, and Epaminondas, the death of Socrates, that holy martyr, a death like that of Christ, the purple light of Plato, which shines yet into all ages and is a test of the sublimest intellects, to receive the influences, however partial, of all this, and to speak of it as if it were nothing, or, like a fool, underpraise it in a sermon because the worshippers are ignorant and incapable of understanding that there may be degrees and varieties of merit, and that the merit of Paul shall not be less because that of Aristotle is genuine and great. I call that mean-spirited, if it were Channing or Luther that did it. Be it remembered of Milton, who drank deeply of these fountains, that in an age and assembly of fierce fanatics, he drew as freely from these resources, and with just acknowledgment, as from those known and honored by his party. Quote, his soul was like a star and dwelt apart. If I were called upon to charge a young minister, I would say beware of tradition, tradition which embarrasses life and falsifies all teaching. The sermons that I hear are all dead of that ale. The preacher is betrayed by his ear. He begins to inveigh against some real evil, and falls unconsciously into formulas of speech which have been said and sung in the church some ages and have lost all life. They never had any but when freshly and with special conviction applied. But you must never lose sight of the purpose of helping a particular person in every word you say. Thus my preacher summed the deaths of the past year, and then reminded the bereaved that these were admonitions of God to them, etc., etc. Now all these words fell to the ground. They are Hamlet's, many asses of great charge, mere wind. He ought to have considered whether it were true, as his ear had always heard, to be sure without contradiction, that deaths were admonitions. By enumerating in his mind the persons that would be included in this address, he would quickly perceive that there was great disparity in the cases. Many had mourned, but were not now mourners; that some of the deaths were to the survivors desirable, some quite indifferent; that some of the survivors were persons of that habitual elevation of religious view as to have just views of death, and so were above this prose. Others were of such manifold business or preoccupation of mind as that any death must occupy but a subordinate place in their thoughts, and if anywhere the words might be spoken with strict propriety, they were yet so general as not likely to strike that ear. I am prolix on this instance, yet the fault is obvious to a discerning ear in almost every sentence of the prayers and sermons that are ordinarily heard in the church. Not so with Edward Taylor, that living Methodist, the poet of the church. Not so with the Swedenborgians, if their pulpit resembles their book. December 29th. A critic pronounced that Wordsworth was a good man, but no poet. Ah, said one present, you know not how much poetry there is in goodness. Charles says he has 4 stomachs like a camel, and what law he reads in the morning he puts into the first stomach till evening, then it slides into the second. Every truth is a full circle. He made himself of no reputation. The words have a divine sound. To the music of the surly storm that thickens the darkness of the night abroad, and rocks the walls and fans my cheeks through the chinks and cracks, I would sing my strain, though hoarse and small. Yet, please God, it shall be lowly, affectionate, and true. It were worth trial whether the distinction between a spiritual and traditional religion could not be made apparent to an ordinary congregation. There are parts of faith so great, so self-evident, that when the mind rests in them, the pretensions of the most illuminated, most pretending sect pass for nothing. When I rest in perfect humility, when I burn with pure love, what can Calvin or Swedenborg say to me? But to show men the nullity of church-going compared with the real exaltation of their being, I think might even promote parish objects and draw them to church. To show the reality and infinite depths of spiritual laws, that all the maxims of Christ are true to the core of the world, that there is not, nor can't be, any cheating of nature might be apprehended. Every spiritual law, I suppose, would be a contradiction to common sense. Thus I should begin with my old saws, that nothing can be given, everything is sold, love compels love, hatred, action and reaction, always are equal, no evil in society but has its check with coexists, the moral, the physical, the social world is a plenum, and any flood in one place produces equal ebb in another. Nothing is free but the will of man, and that only to procure his own virtue. On every other side but that one he beats the air with his pompous action, that punishment not follows but accompanies crime. They have said in churches in this age, mere morality. O God, they know not thee who speak so contemptuously of all that is grand. It is the distinction of Christianity that it is moral. All that is personal in it is not. When anyone comes who speaks with better insight into moral nature, he will be the new gospel. Miracle or not, inspired or uninspired, he will be the Christ. Persons are nothing. If I could tell you what you know not, could, by my knowledge of the divine being, put that within your grasp which you now dimly apprehend, and make you feel the moral sublime, you would never think of denying my inspiration. The whole power of Christianity resides in this fact, that it is more agreeable to the constitution of man than any other teaching. But from the constitution of man may be got better teaching still. Morality requires purity, but purity is not it. Requires justice, but justice is not that. Requires beneficence, but is something better. Indeed, there is a kind of dissent and accommodation felt when we leave speaking of moral nature to urge a virtue it enjoins. For to the soul in her pure action all the virtues are natural and not painfully acquired. Excite the soul, and it becomes suddenly virtuous. Touch the deep heart, and all these listless, stingy, beef-eating bystanders will see the dignity of a sentiment, will say, "This is good, and all I have I will give for that." Excite the soul, and the weather and the town and your condition in the world all disappear, and the world itself loses its solidity. Nothing remains but the soul and the divine presence in which it lives. Youth and age are indifferent on this presence. Overturn, overturn, and overturn, said our aged priest, until he whose right it is to reign shall come into his kingdom. The great willow tree over my roof is the trumpet and accompaniment of the storm, and give due importance to every caprice of the gale, and the trees in the avenue announce the same facts with equal din to the front tenants. Hoarse concert, they roar like the rigging of a ship in a tempest. The Unitarian preacher, who sees that his orthodox hearer may with reason complain that the preaching is not serious, faithful, authoritative enough, is by that admission judged. It is not an excuse that he can with clearness see the speculative error of his neighbor. But when a man speaks from deeper convictions than any party faith, when he declares the simple truth, he finds his relation to the Calvinist or Methodist or infidel at once changed in the most agreeable manner. He is of their faith, says each. It is really a spiritual power which stopped the mouths of the regular priests in the presence of the fervent first Quaker and his friends. If the dead alive never learned before that they do not speak with authority from the highest, they learn it then, when a commissioned man comes who speaks because he cannot hold back the message that is in his heart. Certainly I read a similar story respecting Luther, that the preacher's heart, stout enough before, misgave him when he perceived Luther was in the audience. The height of virtue is only to act in a firm belief that moral laws hold. Jesus and St. Paul and Socrates and Phocion believed, in spite of their senses, that moral law existed and reigned, and so believing could not have acted otherwise. The sinner lets go his perception of these laws, and then acts agreeably to the lower law of the senses. The logic of the sinner and of the saint is perfect. There is no flaw in either Epicureanism or Stoicism. Does not Aristotle distinguish between temperance for ends and temperance for love of temperance? Each of these virtues becomes dowdy in a sermon. They must be practiced for their elegance. The virtuous man must be a poet and not a drudge of his virtues to have them perfect. If he could, by implication, perform all the virtues, that is, not aim to be temperate, nor aim to be honest, nor aim to be liberal, but in his lofty piety be all three without knowing it, then is he the good moralist. The ecclesiastical dogma of faith, not works, is based on this truth. Jesus believed in moral nature, and he did not come in his own name. When a preacher does not say he comes in his own name, he generally looks it or speaks it plainer than by words. And that is the end of Emerson's journal collection number 25 from 1834. In the next video, we will proceed to journal collection number 26, which takes place over the year 1835. Thank you for listening.